You remember the big ones, the shows everyone talks about. But what about the cartoons that quietly disappeared? The ones that aired once, then vanished like they were never meant to be found. Hidden across the 1980s are sci-fi worlds darker, stranger, and sometimes better than the hits you grew up with. So why did they fade, while others became legends? Because some of these weren't just forgotten. They were left behind. For a reason. Ring Raiders, 1989. The sky is no longer just sky. It's a battlefield stretched across time itself. Ring Raiders takes a concept that sounds almost playful, fighter pilots pulled from different eras, and turns it into something quietly disorienting. In World War II, aces flying beside futuristic jets. Past and future colliding without explanation. There's no time to process it, no grounding, just constant movement through eras that don't belong together. The villains don't just fight, they erase. Entire timelines reduced to fragments. The heroes are trapped in a war they barely understand, recruited into something bigger than history itself. What makes it rare isn't just its short run. It's the tone beneath the action. There's no clear victory, no sense that things will return to normal, because normal doesn't exist anymore. And when time itself becomes unstable, what exactly are you fighting to protect? The Bot's Master, 1989. A child builds the future. Then the future turns against him. The Bot's Master centers on a boy genius who creates advanced robots, intelligent, adaptable, almost human. At first, they feel like companions, tools of progress. But control is fragile, and once power spreads, it doesn't stay where it was created. The world around him shifts into something more oppressive. Machines begin to serve authority instead of freedom. Surveillance, enforcement, obedience. His own creations become both his greatest strength and his biggest risk. The tone carries a quiet paranoia, not loud, not obvious, but always there. Who controls the machines, and what happens when that answer changes? The show didn't last long, but its ideas linger, because it asks a question that feels even more uncomfortable now than it did then. If intelligence can be built, can it also be taken? Pole Position, 1984. At first, it looks like a racing show, bright cars, fast action, clean, simple energy. But listen closer. The vehicles speak, think, react. They aren't machines, they're observers. Pole Position hides its science fiction beneath movement. A family of agents operates under the surface of everyday life, assisted by AI-driven cars that seem almost aware, not just responsive, aware. The tone never fully explains it, and that's where the tension grows. Because when technology starts behaving like a partner instead of a tool, something shifts. The balance changes. Control becomes shared, and shared control is never stable. The missions themselves feel secondary. What matters is the relationship between human and machine. Trust built on systems that no one fully understands. It didn't become a defining series, maybe because it felt too subtle, too quiet in its questions. But the idea it presents is difficult to ignore. If something can drive for you, think for you, decide for you, then where do you end and where does it begin? Starcom, the U.S. Space Force, 1987. Space isn't colorful here. It isn't magical. It's controlled, strategic, cold. Starcom strips away the fantasy and replaces it with something closer to reality. Military structure, chain of command, calculated movement through orbit. The technology feels grounded. Satellites, stations, tactical operations. There's no chaos, only precision. And that precision creates a different kind of tension, because everything depends on order, and when order breaks, everything collapses. The enemies aren't exaggerated monsters. They're calculated threats, organized, intentional. The show moves with a sense of discipline that feels almost uncomfortable compared to other cartoons of the era. No excess, no distraction, just quiet pressure building with every decision. It didn't capture wide attention, maybe because it removed the spectacle people expected. But what it replaced it with was something more unsettling, a version of space that feels possible. And when something feels possible, it becomes harder to ignore. Defenders of the Earth, 1986. Heroes from different worlds brought together under one idea: protection, unity, survival. Defenders of the Earth gathers legendary figures, Flash Gordon, the Phantom, Mandrake, and places them into a shared future shaped by advanced threats. But something about it feels off. These characters weren't built for the same world, different tones, different histories, different rules, and yet they're forced to operate together as if those differences don't matter. The tension doesn't come from the villains alone. It comes from the imbalance, from watching systems try to merge that were never meant to fit. Ming the Merciless represents more than opposition. He represents control through domination, complete, absolute, unquestioned. And the heroes stand as fragments trying to resist it. The show carries a strange energy, familiar but unstable, recognizable but slightly disconnected. It didn't fade completely, but it never fully settled into memory either, because it exists in between eras, between identities. And sometimes, that's the most difficult place to survive. BraveStarr, 1987, a frontier, but not the one you expect. BraveStarr takes the structure of a Western and moves it into space. A new planet, new laws, new dangers. But the themes remain old: power, control, justice, and the constant question of who decides what justice looks like. Marshal BraveStarr stands as the enforcer of order, but his strength isn't just physical, it's symbolic. He represents a system trying to hold itself together in an environment that resists structure. The villains aren't just criminals, they're forces of instability, and instability spreads. The tone moves between action and something more reflective, moments where everything slows down just enough to reveal what's underneath. A fragile balance, a world that could fall apart at any moment. It gained attention, but not permanence. Because it exists in a space between genres, too grounded for fantasy, too abstract for realism, and that tension never fully resolves. Because some worlds aren't meant to feel stable, they're meant to remind you how quickly things can shift. The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers, 1986. This wasn't built like other cartoons. It wasn't designed for simplicity. Galaxy Rangers introduces a universe where technology isn't just a tool, it's integrated into identity. Characters enhanced with systems that blur the line between human and machine. But unlike others, it doesn't celebrate that change. It questions it. Every upgrade feels like a trade. Power in exchange for something harder to define. Control, freedom, self. The tone is darker, slower, more deliberate. Stories unfold with consequences that don't disappear at the end of the episode. And that changes everything, because actions carry weight. And weight creates tension. It didn't reach the mass audience it could have. Maybe because it asked more than it explained. Maybe because it didn't simplify its world for easy viewing. But that complexity is what makes it stand out, because it reflects a future that isn't clean, isn't easy, and isn't fully understood. And sometimes, that's the most honest version of the future there is. Saber Rider and the Star Sheriffs, 1987, a Western, a space opera, a reconstruction. Saber Rider isn't just a show, it's a transformation. Adapted and reshaped from its original version, it carries two identities at once, and that duality never disappears. On the surface, it's structured, clear heroes, defined missions, a mechanical defender known as Ramrod standing between order and chaos. But underneath, something feels altered, tones shift unexpectedly, moments feel reassembled rather than created, because they were. The result is a world that feels familiar but slightly disconnected, like something translated without losing its meaning, but not fully preserving its original form either. The enemies aren't just threats, they're unknowns, outriders that exist beyond the rules the heroes understand. And that lack of understanding creates tension that never fully resolves. It didn't fail, but it didn't anchor itself either, because it exists between versions, between intentions. And when something exists between, it never fully belongs to either side. Silverhawks, 1986. A metal replaces flesh. Not entirely, but enough to change everything. Silverhawks presents a team of partially cybernetic enforcers operating in deep space. Enhanced bodies, augmented abilities, controlled power. But the transformation isn't framed as a cost, it's framed as progress. And that's where the unease begins, because nothing that replaces part of what you are comes without consequence. The villains reflect that same transformation, but without restraint. Monstar doesn't evolve. He mutates, and the line between hero and villain begins to blur, not in action, but in origin. They come from the same idea, the same process, just taken in different directions. The show moves quickly, bright colors, fast action, but underneath that speed is a question that never fully surfaces. If becoming stronger means becoming less human, then what exactly are you protecting? It became recognizable, but not essential, because it sits in a space that's difficult to define, not fully heroic, not fully cautionary, just unresolved. Inhumanoids, 1986. Before the ground breaks, there's always a warning, a tremor, a sound, something small enough to ignore, until it isn't. Inhumanoids begins beneath you, buried, waiting. Ancient creatures rise, not just to destroy, but to corrupt, decompose, tendril, meddler. They don't feel like villains. They feel inevitable. And the ones fighting back? Not heroes. Scientists, specialists, people trying to understand something beyond control. That's the tension, because knowledge doesn't save you. The world feels heavier than most cartoons of its time. Every victory feels temporary, every solution fragile. It didn't last long. But maybe it wasn't meant to. Some ideas resist comfort, resist repetition. And when something feels unstoppable, you stop asking how to win and start asking how long you have left. Dino-Riders, 1988. The past becomes a weapon, not symbolically, literally. Dino-Riders takes one of the oldest images imaginable, dinosaurs, and transforms them into tools of war. Laser cannons mounted on living creatures, minds controlled through technology, power forced onto something that was never meant to carry it. At first it feels imaginative, almost exciting, but the more you watch, the more unsettling it becomes, because nothing here is natural anymore. The Valorians try to coexist, guiding the dinosaurs with respect. The Rulons do the opposite. They dominate, control, override. And that contrast is where the tension builds, not just between sides, but between methods, the same creatures, the same world, two completely different approaches. The show didn't last long, but its imagery stayed, because it presents a question without ever asking it directly. If something powerful can be controlled, does that make it yours? Or does it just mean you've changed it into something else entirely? Centurions, 1986. Power doesn't come from within. It comes from what you attach to yourself. Centurions builds its world around a simple idea. Humans enhanced through exoframe technology. Weapons don't exist separately. They connect, integrate, become part of the body. Power extreme. But that phrase carries weight, because extreme power is never neutral. Doc Terror, but the central antagonist, doesn't just use technology. He replaces humanity with it. Fully, completely. No balance, no restraint. And the heroes? They stand somewhere in between. That's where the tension lives. Not in the battles, but in the difference between enhancement and replacement. Each activation feels like a shift, a moment where the human form becomes something else. The show moves fast, action-driven, clean structure. But beneath that, there's a quiet question. If your strength comes from something outside of you, then what happens when it's gone? Visionaries, Knights of the Magical Light, 1987. Technology fails, magic replaces it. Visionaries begins with a collapse. Systems shut down, machines stop working. A world built on science suddenly loses its foundation. And in that vacuum, something older returns. Magic. Knights gain powers tied to symbols, totems that represent animals, instincts, forces beyond logic. Armor becomes alive with energy. Weapons respond to will instead of code. At first, it feels like evolution, but it's not. It's substitution. Science doesn't grow into magic. It disappears. And something else takes its place. That shift creates tension that never fully resolves, because nothing explains why it happened. The conflict between factions reflects that uncertainty. Not just good versus evil, but belief versus belief. It didn't last long, maybe because it removed the rules viewers were used to. Because when logic disappears, control becomes harder to hold. Galaxy High School, 1986. The universe feels smaller here, but not safer. On Galaxy High takes something familiar, a school, and places it in a completely unfamiliar setting. Alien students, unknown cultures, different rules, and one human caught in the middle. Doyle arrives expecting recognition, success, importance. Instead, he becomes irrelevant. That reversal drives everything. Because the world doesn't adjust to him, he has to adjust to it. The tone is lighter on the surface. Strange creatures, absurd situations, but underneath, there's isolation. Being surrounded doesn't mean belonging. Every interaction highlights difference, not aggressively, but constantly. It didn't become a defining show, but its concept lingers, because it reflects something simple and uncomfortable. Sometimes the world you enter isn't built for you. And no matter how hard you try, that doesn't change. Spiral Zone, 1987. The threat isn't coming. It's already here. Spiral Zone divides the world into two parts, safe and infected. A mysterious force spreads across regions, altering everything it touches. Environment, behavior, control. Those inside don't realize it. Those outside can't fully understand it. And the soldiers sent in? They rely on protection that feels temporary at best. Specialized suits, limited exposure, strict boundaries. Because the zone doesn't just exist physically, it influences. That's what makes it dangerous. You don't just fight it. You risk becoming part of it. The tone stays controlled, focused, but there's always pressure beneath it. Because the line between inside and outside is thin. And if that line breaks, there's nothing left to separate you from it. Jace and the Wheeled Warriors, 1985. Life evolves. Then it turns. Jace presents a conflict between organic intelligence and human control. Plant-based creatures, mutated, aware, aggressive, rise against those who created the conditions for their existence. They aren't random, they're reactive, and that makes them unpredictable. Jace's mission feels clear. Find the missing piece, restore balance. But the journey never completes. The story remains unfinished. That absence becomes part of its identity. Because without resolution, the conflict never truly ends. The world stays in motion, always searching, never arriving. It didn't conclude, and maybe that's why it's remembered. Because some stories don't fade, they remain open. The Mysterious Cities of Gold, 1982. The past isn't gone, it's hidden. Cities of Gold blends history with advanced technology that shouldn't exist. Ancient civilizations powered by knowledge far beyond their time. Solar energy, flight, machines built with precision that feels impossible. But none of it is explained fully. And that's where the mystery grows. The characters search for answers. But every discovery leads to something larger, something older. The tone remains calm, almost reflective. But underneath, there's scale, a sense that the world is far more complex than it appears. It didn't rely on spectacle, It relied on discovery, and discovery creates its own tension, because every answer changes what you thought you knew. Robotech, 1985. This wasn't just a cartoon. It was a reconstruction of something much larger and more complex. At first, Robotech feels like a standard sci-fi war story. Giant machines, alien threats, humanity pushed to the edge. But the deeper you go, the more something shifts. Because this world doesn't reset. Characters don't just fight, they change. They age, they lose, they carry consequences forward. And that's what makes it different. Most shows protect the viewer from permanence. Robotech doesn't. Relationships evolve and break. Victories feel temporary. And the war never truly ends. It transforms. What makes it even more unusual is how it was built. 3 separate Japanese series stitched together into one continuous narrative. And somehow, it works. But that fusion creates a strange feeling. Like the story is always moving forward, but never fully grounded. Events happen. Time passes. But closure stays just out of reach. It didn't fade because it was weak. It faded because it asked for more attention than most viewers were ready to give. Because once you realize the story doesn't protect its characters, you start watching differently. Not for who will win, but for who will still be left standing when it's over. Bionic 6, 1987. A family becomes a weapon. Not by choice, by design. Bionic 6 looks bright on the surface, almost cheerful. A father, a mother, children, even a grandmother, all granted cybernetic powers to fight a rising technological threat. But underneath the color is something colder. Control, transformation, identity rewritten through machinery. And each activation sequence feels less like empowerment and more like surrender. Their bodies respond to commands that aren't entirely human anymore. And their enemy, Dr. Scarab, doesn't just want to defeat them. He wants to perfect the process that created them. What makes it unsettling is how normal everything appears. Dinner tables, family banter. Then suddenly, metal, energy, weapons. It never became a mainstream hit. Maybe because it blurred a line people weren't ready to question. When does enhancement stop being help and start becoming control? Ulysses 31, 1981. Space isn't empty, it's watching. Ulysses 31 reimagines mythology as something vast and technological. Gods become forces, not visible, but present, always observing, always influencing. And Ulysses isn't just traveling. He's being tested. Every encounter feels deliberate, every challenge controlled. The universe isn't random, it's structured. And that structure isn't in his favor. The tone is distant, almost cold. Because the journey isn't about reaching a destination, it's about enduring what's placed in front of you. It didn't become mainstream, but it stayed with those who saw it. Because it leaves something unresolved. If the universe is controlled, then how much of your path is really yours? Some of these shows didn't fail. They faded. Quietly, without explanation. But the ideas they carried never really disappeared. They're still here, hidden in newer stories, buried in familiar worlds. So the real question isn't what happened to them. It's how many more like this were lost before anyone thought to remember them.